I sat in the gallery of a Franklin County family courtroom in April 2024, watching my 17-year-old stepdaughter, Brianna, testify under oath that I had never really wanted to be her stepmother, that our entire relationship had been, in her words, mostly for show. While opposing counsel prepared to introduce evidence I had personally filed with this same court 11 years earlier. Formal adoption consent paperwork that told an entirely different story than the one Brianna was currently presenting to the judge. How Brianna and I actually began. My name is Renata Ashford, and I married Brianna's father, Marcus, in 2013, when Brianna was 6 years old, following 2 years of dating that had unfolded, deliberately and carefully, with Brianna's own gradual introduction and comfort as a genuine priority throughout that entire process. I need to explain the specific, genuine history of my relationship with Brianna, because understanding this actual history matters enormously to understanding both the shock of her courtroom testimony and the significance of the adoption paperwork that would eventually contradict it. Brianna's biological mother, Kelly, had struggled significantly with substance abuse issues throughout Brianna's early childhood, resulting in Marcus receiving primary physical custody when Brianna was just 3 years old, with Kelly maintaining only limited, inconsistent supervised visitation across the following years before eventually, in 2015, having her parental rights formally terminated following a pattern of missed visits and continued substance abuse struggles that the court determined made reunification genuinely unsafe for Brianna's well-being. I entered Brianna's life 2 years before this formal termination, when she was 6, and built, across the following years, what I genuinely believed was a close, loving relationship. Helping with homework, attending school events, managing the countless ordinary daily responsibilities of parenting alongside Marcus, developing what I understood to be genuine mutual affection and trust between Brianna and me across nearly a full decade of consistent, dedicated involvement in her life. The formal adoption process. I want to explain the specific circumstances surrounding the adoption paperwork itself, because understanding both my genuine motivation for pursuing formal adoption and the specific legal process involved matters considerably to the eventual courtroom significance of these documents. Following Kelly's parental rights termination in 2015, when Brianna was 8, Marcus and I began discussing the possibility of my formally adopting Brianna, a process that would establish me as her full legal parent alongside Marcus, rather than simply her stepmother without formal legal standing. I want to be direct that I pursued this adoption process out of genuine, deliberate desire. Not any external pressure from Marcus or obligation I felt compelled to fulfill, but a considered decision reflecting how thoroughly I had already come to consider Brianna my own daughter in every meaningful sense across the preceding 4 years, wanting our legal relationship to formally reflect what already existed, in practice, within our family. We initiated the formal step-parent adoption process in early 2016, working with a family law attorney to navigate the specific requirements, including my own detailed consent paperwork, home study evaluations, and, significantly, given Brianna's age at the time, her own required consent as a child old enough, under Ohio law, to have her wishes formally considered in the adoption proceeding. The adoption was finalized in September 2016, when Brianna was 9 years old, with both my own filed consent forms and Brianna's own signed, age-appropriate consent statement. A document she had, according to my clear memory of that period, genuinely, enthusiastically participated in completing, including a handwritten note she'd added herself, at the family court's invitation for children old enough to include their own statement, expressing her own happiness about the adoption becoming official. The years that followed. I want to describe, briefly, the genuinely warm, close relationship Brianna and I maintained across the following years, because this context matters considerably to understanding how genuinely shocking her eventual courtroom testimony became. Brianna and I shared, across her childhood and into her early teenage years, what I experienced as an authentic, close mother-daughter relationship, regular one-on-one time together, my consistent presence at her extracurricular activities, countless ordinary moments of daily parenting that had built, across nearly a decade following the formal adoption, what I genuinely believed was a secure, loving bond between us. I want to be honest that our relationship, like many parent-child relationships, experienced genuine strain during Brianna's mid-teenage years, particularly following Marcus's and my own eventual divorce in 2021, when Brianna was 14. A divorce that, while amicable in most practical respects, understandably created some difficult adjustment for Brianna navigating a newly restructured family situation. Following this divorce, Marcus retained primary physical custody, with Brianna dividing time between our two households, an arrangement that functioned reasonably well across the following 2 years. Though I want to acknowledge that our relationship during this period required more deliberate effort and occasionally carried more tension than it had during her earlier childhood. What triggered the family court proceeding? I need to explain the specific circumstances that led to the family court proceeding where Brianna's troubling testimony occurred, because understanding this broader context matters to fully understanding the situation. Following Marcus's own remarriage in 2023 to a woman named Sandra, and given some emerging concerns regarding financial arrangements and custody logistics as Brianna approached her 18th birthday, a formal family court proceeding was initiated in early 2024 specifically to address several outstanding legal matters, including, significantly, a formal petition Marcus's attorney had filed regarding modification of certain existing child support and college fund arrangements that had originally been established as part of our 2021 divorce settlement. I was called to testify in this proceeding specifically because these existing arrangements included provisions establishing my own ongoing financial obligations toward Brianna's future college expenses. Obligations I had voluntarily agreed to as part of our original divorce settlement, reflecting my continued commitment to Brianna's well-being despite Marcus's and my own marriage ending. Given my status as her legally adoptive parent, with the same ongoing legal and financial obligations any biological parent would carry. Brianna's testimony. I want to describe, with as much precision as I'm able to recall, the specific testimony Brianna offered during this proceeding, because the content and framing of her statements carried genuine, significant weight in the courtroom before the adoption documentation was eventually introduced. Brianna, now 17 and testifying with her own appointed guardian, ad litem, present given her status as a minor still technically involved in ongoing custody and support proceedings, described our relationship in terms that genuinely shocked me, sitting in the courtroom gallery listening to her account. I don't think Renata ever really wanted to be my stepmother, Brianna testified, according to the court transcript I would later obtain. I think she went along with the adoption because it was what my dad wanted, and because it made things easier logistically, but I don't think there was ever really genuine love there the way people assume happens in these situations. Our relationship has mostly felt like an obligation, especially since the divorce, and I don't think it's fair that she should still be financially responsible for my college expenses when the whole relationship was mostly for show in the first place. I want to be honest about the specific, devastating shock of hearing this characterization from a young woman I had genuinely, deeply loved and cared for across nearly her entire childhood. A characterization that felt, in that moment, like watching an entire decade of genuine relationship being retroactively rewritten into something considerably more hollow and transactional than what I had actually experienced and believed we'd shared. My attorney's response. I want to describe the specific legal strategy my attorney, Diane Castellano, employed in response to this testimony, because the introduction of the original adoption paperwork became central to addressing the court's understanding of what Brianna's testimony had characterized. Your Honor, Diane said, during cross-examination following Brianna's initial testimony, I'd like to introduce Exhibit C, the original step-parent adoption consent documentation filed with this same court in 2016, including the minor's own signed consent statement from that proceeding. I want to describe the specific documents Diane introduced, because their content directly, unmistakably contradicted the characterization Brianna had just offered under oath. My own consent affidavit from 2016 included a detailed personal statement I had written at the time, describing my genuine desire to formally adopt Brianna, expressing, in considerable detail, the depth of love and commitment I felt toward her, and specifically addressing why I wanted this legal relationship to reflect what I already considered a genuine parent-child bond, rather than any kind of obligatory formality. More significantly, Brianna's own contemporaneous consent statement, written in her 9-year-old handwriting and formally filed with the court as part of the original 2016 proceeding, included her own words expressing genuine happiness about the adoption. I am really happy that Renata is going to be my real mom now, not just my stepmom. She already feels like my mom, and I want everyone to know she really is. The courtroom's reaction. I want to describe the specific reaction this documentation produced within the courtroom, because the introduction of Brianna's own 9-year-old words directly contradicting her current, considerably more dismissive characterization created a genuinely significant moment in the proceeding. The judge, reviewing this documentation directly, asked Brianna several pointed follow-up questions regarding the discrepancy between her current testimony and her own earlier, formally filed statement. Brianna's response to these questions revealed a considerably more complicated situation than her initial, dismissive characterization had suggested. I don't really remember writing that, Brianna said, her composure visibly faltering under the judge's direct questioning. I mean, I'm sure I did write it since it's clearly my handwriting, but that was a long time ago, and things have changed a lot since then, especially after the divorce. The judge, notably, pressed further on this point. Miss Ashford, the judge said, addressing Brianna directly, I understand relationships can genuinely change over time, and I want to give appropriate weight to your current feelings and experiences. But I need you to help me understand more specifically what you mean when you characterize your entire relationship with your adoptive mother as having never really involved genuine love or desire on her part. Given this quite clear, quite detailed documentation from 2016 suggesting otherwise, from both her own statement and your own words as a 9-year-old at the time. What actually emerged? I want to describe what actually emerged over the following portion of this court proceeding, as the judge continued probing more carefully into the actual, underlying source of Brianna's current characterization and testimony. Brianna, under this more careful questioning, gradually revealed a considerably more complicated, and in some ways more understandable, underlying reality than her initial, sweeping dismissal had suggested. I think, she said, eventually, her voice carrying genuine emotion, what I'm actually upset about isn't really about back when I was younger. It's about the past few years since the divorce. I feel like Renata's new life, since she's not with my dad anymore, doesn't really have room for me the way it used to. And I guess I've been telling myself a story where maybe that means it was never really genuine in the first place, because that feels easier than just admitting I'm hurt that things feel different now. I want to be honest about my own reaction, sitting in that courtroom, hearing this fuller, more complicated truth finally emerge. A mixture of genuine relief that the earlier sweeping dismissal of our entire relationship wasn't actually Brianna's full, considered belief, alongside real, aching sadness at understanding how much genuine hurt and insecurity had apparently been building within her across the 3 years since Marcus's and my own divorce. Hurt I hadn't fully recognized or adequately addressed during that period. Understanding my own role in this situation. I want to be honest and reflective about my own role in the dynamic that had apparently developed across the 3 years since my divorce from Marcus, because I don't think this story is fully honest if I simply present myself as an innocent party wrongly accused, without acknowledging genuine gaps in my own effort during this period. Following the divorce, I want to admit, I had allowed myself, gradually and without fully realizing I was doing it, to become somewhat more passive regarding maintaining consistent, dedicated connection with Brianna, no longer sharing a household with her, no longer automatically present for the countless small, daily moments that had characterized our relationship during her earlier childhood. And I recognize now with the benefit of this difficult courtroom reckoning, not always proactively reaching out or initiating connection during her increasingly busy, independent teenage years, the way I might have if I'd more fully appreciated how genuinely insecure she'd apparently grown regarding her place in my ongoing life. The aftermath of the hearing. I want to describe what happened following this family court proceeding, because the actual, practical resolution, regarding both the specific legal matters at hand and, more significantly, my relationship with Brianna going forward, unfolded gradually over the following months rather than resolving immediately within the courtroom itself. The judge, ultimately, upheld the existing college fund and support arrangements from our original 2021 divorce settlement, finding that Brianna's testimony, once fully explored, did not actually support her attorney's initial argument that these arrangements should be modified based on some claimed absence of genuine parental relationship. The documented history, both from 2016 and from the fuller picture that emerged during questioning, clearly established a genuine, if currently strained, parent-child relationship warranting continued legal and financial obligation. But I want to be clear that the legal outcome mattered considerably less to me, in the aftermath of this proceeding, than the more significant work of actually rebuilding genuine connection with Brianna, now that her real underlying hurt and insecurity had finally been named clearly, both to the court and, more importantly, to me directly. The conversation that followed. I want to describe the significant conversation Brianna and I had, roughly 2 weeks after this court proceeding, once both of us had some time to process everything that had emerged during that difficult hearing. I invited Brianna to meet me at a coffee shop, wanting a private, calm setting away from either of our households or any remaining legal proceedings, specifically to address directly what had actually surfaced during her testimony. Brianna, I said, once we'd settled into this conversation, I need you to know how much it hurt hearing you describe our relationship the way you did in that courtroom. But I also heard what you said once the judge asked you more questions, about feeling like there wasn't room for you in my life since the divorce, and I need to tell you honestly, I think you're right that I let myself become more distant than I should have these past few years, even though that was never, ever because I stopped loving you or considering you my genuine daughter. Brianna, in response, offered her own genuine, difficult acknowledgement. I think I've spent the past few years telling myself this story that made it easier to be hurt, she said, because if I convinced myself it was never really real in the first place, then it didn't feel as devastating that it seemed like it was fading away. I'm sorry I said what I said in court. I know deep down that it wasn't true, especially reading my own words from when I was 9. I think I just needed you to actually notice how much things had changed, and I didn't know how to say that directly, so it came out sideways, in the worst possible way, in front of a judge. Rebuilding. I want to detail the specific, deliberate effort Brianna and I invested, across the following year, toward rebuilding the genuine closeness that had characterized our relationship during her earlier childhood, work that required consistent, ongoing commitment from both of us. We established a standing weekly dinner, just the two of us, a practice we maintained consistently across the following year, specifically designed to rebuild the kind of regular, dedicated one-on-one connection that had naturally existed when we shared a household, but had gradually eroded following the divorce. I made a deliberate effort, as Brianna's college search process began in earnest that same year, to be genuinely, actively involved. Campus visits, application essay reviews, financial aid discussions, ensuring, through consistent action rather than simply reassuring words, that she understood clearly her place in my ongoing life and future remained genuinely secure. Epilogue. It has been just over a year since that difficult family court proceeding, and my relationship with Brianna has been genuinely, substantially rebuilt in the time since. not simply returned to exactly what it was during her earlier childhood, but reconstructed into something that reflects, more honestly, the actual adult relationship we're now building as she approaches her own independence. Brianna is now a freshman at Ohio State University, and I want to describe a specific, meaningful detail from her recent move-in day. She asked me, specifically, alongside Marcus and Sandra, to be present for that significant transition. A request that, given everything that had unfolded the previous year, carried particular meaning for both of us. I keep a copy of that original 2016 adoption consent paperwork, including Brianna's own 9-year-old handwritten statement, in a folder I've maintained since that difficult court proceeding. Not as some kind of evidence I anticipate ever needing again, but as a genuine reminder of a truth that remained real and valid even during the period Brianna herself struggled to fully trust it. That the family we built together, however complicated its subsequent evolution became, was never simply for show, but represented, from its earliest formal beginning, a genuine, deliberately chosen bond that both of us, in our different ways, ultimately fought to preserve and rebuild once its foundation was seriously, painfully tested. The end,